Hallelujah. All right. So first piece of information for today's class is that if champagne does not come from a place called Champagne, it can't be called champagne.
Correct.
It's called sparkling wine.
Right, exactly.
And if cognac does not come from a place called cognac, it's called brandy.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, that's
Whiskey
it.
doesn't come from Kentucky. It's
No, that's the old rule.
No, whiskey.
Bourbon can come, I used to think that too, but bourbon can come from places other than Bourbon
I'm just
County,
joking.
Kentucky.
Oh, really?
I know it
Yeah.
can.
They
So
didn't lock it in legally quick enough.
But there are rules in order to call something bourbon. It has to be at least 51% corn mash. It has to be stored in brand new oak barrels.
Mm-hmm.
And the oak barrels have to be singed
need
or
paper.
whatever you want to call it, burnt, and they can't be reused.
Okay. Now you have
You know,
it. See,
next year-
people
Next year you have whiskey from Israel.
next week
Next year.
in like
Yeah, that's
2019.
That's right.
Okay. You're bringing
M&H, milk and honey.
Yeah.
is that a whiskey from Israel?
It's
Yeah.
coming next
Really?
year.
Very
Alright.
small distillery.
They're not very known for their whiskey, Israelis.
They're not here yet.
Yeah.
But they
They
will
just
be.
started.
Oh,
Wow.
really? They're starting to import it
Yeah.
here?
No,
Wow.
they start. They're
Starting to make it
next
there.
year. They're starting to make it
Wow.
out to Tel Aviv.
Wow.
It has to
amazing.
age in the barrels for a while. You know,
Yeah.
you don't just pour
Yeah,
it
I
out.
get it.
Otherwise, it's
I always
vodka.
think when you start these whiskey companies, you need to have capital for 12 years.
You probably do.
Used to.
It's a real big problem.
Oh,
You know, you're not turning over, and then you gotta hope. You see what happens. But anyway, let's begin the class today. It's called Being Grounded Amidst the Chaos of Daily Life. We're going to learn a little bit about Yaakov and Yosef. It's connected actually to next week's parsha, but it's since we're learning a lot about the two characters, Yaakov and Yosef, I figured we'd get right into it and learn a little bit about them. So I have over here a Sikha, Lakota Sikhas, and I'm going to be kind of referencing this. This is a talk that the Rebbe gave, analyzing in a masterful way about the difference between Yaakov and Yosef and how they had very, very different lifestyles and how they dealt with challenges and things like that. And from there, we'll get to being grounded and everything else, and we'll take it from there. So let's start. At the beginning over here, we have some psukim from beginning of Parshas Vayechi, the end of Bereshis. It starts off over here. It's speaking about the point when Yaakov was getting older. He's already 147 years old. He's been living in Egypt for 17 years, and it says he's getting to the point where he's going to pass away, and he's sensing that. So it says, "Vayikruvu Yimei Yisrael Amos," and when the time approached for Israel or Yaakov to pass away, Vayikra Livnei Yosef, he calls to his son Yosef, Vayomer le, and he tells him, "Imna matzasi kem beinecha, if I have found, please, favor in your eyes, simna yadcha tachas yirechi, place your hand beneath my thigh and make a pledge of loyalty." The term they use is chesed v'emes, which means a kindness and a truth. Because it says when you do a favor for somebody that passed away, it's the ultimate kindness. It's true kindness. Because a lot of times when you do kindness to somebody else, there could be an ulterior motive. Sometimes there's a very powerful ulterior motive, like, hey, I did one for you, now you got to do a favor back for me. And sometimes it's a little bit more subtle and diplomatic, where in the back of your mind you're thinking, you know, this is the way it is. You do favors, you get a favor back. But when you do a favor for a person that passed away, you know you're not getting any favors back. That's it. So it's the truest form of kindness. So when you go to a person's funeral and you pay them respects, etc., it's called a chesed shel emes, a kindness of truth. So Yaakov over here is asking Yosef and saying, "Asisi imadi chesed v'emes, do for me a kindness, a truth." What's my request? What's my dying request? What's Yaakov asking his favorite son Yosef? Al tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, do not bury me in Egypt.
Okay, now, Felicia, I have a question.
Yes.
about the thigh.
Why the thigh?
I remember why did he put? And I remember reading something about it, but I don't
Right,
remember.
because that's where, you know, it says when a person makes this, when they promise and they give their word. So, for example, when you were called to the courts in Israel, and they say, you know, you owe this person money. He says, no, I don't owe the money. And it turned out you needed to promise that you don't owe that person money. you would have to hold something holy. So you would hold a Sefer Torah. Or some people would hold a pair of tefillin. And that would give power to the word. Because then if you're promising, you say, I promise. You promise. No. Go open the ark, hold the Sefer Torah, and say, I swear in the name of Hashem. That's, in fact, it says that a lot of people, even though they knew they were being honest, they'd rather pay the money than have to go through that. Because it was just too traumatic. So they didn't have a Torah those days. The only item of holiness, as interesting as it sounds, is the only mitzvah that they got, which was circumcision.
Oh, so that.
So, yeah. So he says, hold or close, whatever it is, and that would be, I know that you're taking this seriously because this is...
So they had to hold up a foreskin?
No, it was lacking the foreskin.
Oh.
Foreskinless. So anyway, I'm glad we got that squared away. And also back to our other topic, that if it's not from champagne, it can't be called champagne. So let's talk about that a little bit. So he says, it was your question, and you just,
Well,
you said Felicia had a
well,
question.
she did. She
Yeah.
asked me when I came in, but anyway.
So he says,
I'll
V'shachafti.
take credit.
Okay, good. V'shachafti ma'avoisai. So then Yaakov tells Yosef, he continues to tell him, and I shall lie with my fathers, Avram and Yitzchak. Where were they buried? Anybody know where Abraham and Isaac are buried?
Shechem?
No.
Syria?
Yosef is buried in Shechem.
Oh, okay.
And that's interesting. That's connected.
Beersheba.
It's got to be
No.
Jordan or Syria.
Okay.
No, they're buried in Israel.
In Israel.
Where?
Oh, okay.
Where in Israel?
I don't remember.
It's called the Cave of the Patriarchs.
I remember that, yeah. I just saw
It's in the
that.
city called Hebron, or Hebron.
Oh,
Right,
halfway-
Adam and Eve are buried there.
That's halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
That's
We lost the whole
it's a
country.
little out.
All right.
In general, everything in Israel is halfway between the other two places. The whole place is tiny.
Yeah, the Cave of the Patriarchs. I just
Right?
saw
That's
that
in
on
Hebron.
TV.
And Avram and Sarah are buried there. Yitzchak and Rivka are buried there. And not to spoil the end of the story, but Yaakov and Leah are buried there.
Leah too?
Leah as well. It was, huh?
So she's got her own...
That was Rachel. Rachel was buried on the side of the road, and she passed away early. But Yaakov and Leah. And Esau's head was buried there as well.
His head.
His head, just his head, not his rest of his body.
Why is that?
That's a separate conversation. It's off topic. So, one day I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to mention this, and then you'll say, why is this? And then I'll speak about that. Say, look, I got off topic. It's easy to set you up. Anyway, so Yaakov says, "V'shachafti ma'avosai, I want to lie with my fathers. Unisasani mimitzrayim, I want you to raise me up out of Egypt. Ukvartani bikfurasam, and bury me there." And what is Yosef's response? Vayomer, Anochi esa kidvaracha. He turns to his father as his father's laying on his deathbed, and he says, "Dad, I will do as you ask me to do." So
there's more in there.
one would think,
Thank you.
well, it's a party. One would think that his father gave him a very reasonable, simple, specific request, his dying request. Yosef says, "Okay, I'll do it. That should be enough." We have one more verse, and that's what we're going to discuss in today's class, the third verse. Vayemer, and Yaakov says, "Hishavali, I want you to swear to me." Vayishavalai, and indeed Yosef swore to him and said, "I swear to you, I will bury you in Israel. I will take you out of here." And many commentaries, and the Rebbe asks, why did Yaakov make Yosef swear? Did he didn't trust him?
Because
He thought
then
he
he
was
would have
lying?
to tell Paro that he swore on his father's deathbed, and then Paro would say he has to.
Where did you get that information from?
Years ago, Midrash probably.
Yeah. Rashi does mention that Paroi at the end was going to try and make him problems. Because, in Egypt, they lived for dead people.
What?
In Egypt, it was all about, it was a big thing, right? In Egypt, it was about
Yep.
tombstones and mummifications, and there was a big industry then, right? So Yaakov, which was clearly a holy person, it was a big deal that he's going to be buried in Egypt. So Paroi wouldn't have any of it. And when it came to the 11th hour, Yosef says, "I got to take my father out, bury him in Israel," or as then was known as Canaan. Pare said, if not for the fact that you promised your father, you swore to him, I wouldn't have let you do it. But you swore to him, I can't make you go against your words. But the Rebbe says, if that's the reason why Yaakov made Yosef swear, then Rashi would have mentioned that right away. Rashi doesn't mention it until way later. So clearly there's something inherent over here that we could understand as to why he made him swear. Before we get to that question, in good Jewish fashion, we have another question. Why do we swear? Where's this concept of swearing?
Well, what kind of swear?
Hey, Aaron.
Not your
There's two kinds.
No. Okay. I'm glad we're clearing this up.
Bad swearing. The reason why in court is not necessarily because anyone believes that because your right hand is on the Bible or whatever it is that you're going to tell the truth through some kind of godly force. It means you're going to be held.
Responsible.
Yeah.
By kind of
Oh,
perjury.
yeah.
It gives the government
Some
the
system.
power to
Yes.
prosecute you for perjury.
Yeah. So we're talking here about swearing amongst honest people. We're talking about Yosef. Let's keep it local. And that's the question. If Yosef is giving his word, why would Jacob make him swear about it as well? But before we get to why is there a concept of swearing? I say, meet me at 2 o'clock. Say, I give you my word. I will meet you at 2 o'clock. You have no reason to believe you're not going to meet him. He's not going to be
So
there
why
at 2
even-
o'clock. What? No, swear to me. Why is there a concept of swearing? In other words, it would almost seem to suggest that the fact that there is a concept of swearing is as if you can't trust anybody. You know why we have swearing? Because when somebody just says something, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it. It's like people say the
Right.
10 Commandments, it's 10
Right.
suggestions.
Right.
Say, I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Well, if I happen to have been there, it turns out I kept my word. And then if I swear, it's like when people talk, you know who you can't trust? Whenever they say, let me tell you a true story. So
But
I don't know if
think
that's a true story, but it means that person has a tendency not always to say true stories.
Yeah, there's
Yeah, you got to
Go to get a coffee. It's worth to wake up for this. So why, and I put that question here in the notes, why do we swear when we give our word? What would be the purpose of that?
Do I want more? In a minute. I'll get it when I'm ready.
okay.
Okay,
Because
good.
there's more in the kitchen.
There's
Swear
more
I
in the
will.
kitchen.
There's
Yeah.
more in the kitchen.
So here's what I'm going to suggest, and here's the way the Rebbe explains it. Chassidus this gives this concept as well. It's like you make what's called a brit, a bond. A brit means a bond, a commitment. It's not just enough to say something. It's like this. They took the stones and they said this will be a symbol. Like what's the meaning of that? So the idea behind it is like this. The understanding when people communicate things through words, when I say, I will be there at 2 o'clock, and you're expecting me to be somewhere at 2 o'clock. The understanding of that commitment, of that transaction is that based on normal circumstances, based on the fact that our friendship will still be intact, based on the fact that the bridge won't collapse, based on that everything is going, as fluid as this conversation is, and the range of possibilities that one could expect within this conversation, that's the level of commitment that I'm giving, that I'm going to be there. But if it turns out that, there's a fire or whatever it is, you'd be like, look, I get it. And it's not just that you would excuse me, you who are waiting for me to come, if you found out that something happened, you'd be like, oh, he's probably not going to come. Why? Because that thing came up. But he gave his word. He gave his word, but look what happened. What is the concept of promising? Or swearing, for that matter? Huh? We say bli neder without a promise, connected to this concept. But what happens the moment I say, I'm going to be there 2 o'clock, and I say, I promise you I'll be there 2 o'clock?
There's an extra emphasis there.
It's not just let's define, it's an
You're
extra
committing
emphasis, I don't want to
yourself.
define it. What we're doing is we're saying that my commitment is now going beyond what's going on. It's going beyond the regular day-to-day gives and takes. It's now a commitment almost beyond rationale.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's like I'm connected to something outside of me. Now, when I give my word, it's my word within me and my experience.
More
When I
consequences
promise
if I
to
don't
you,
hold it.
it's more than consequences. It's now a commitment of honor. You say, well, your word is your honor. But that concept of word being my honor is understood within a range of what could go wrong, and therefore I won't be held accountable. When I promise, when I swear, I say, regardless of what I'm going through, regardless of what's going on, I promise you I'll be there. Okay? So that's just important to define. So we see here Yaakov is making Yosef make this commitment. I'll bury you outside of Egypt. I'll take your body out to Canaan. And Jacob says, I want you to swear to me that that's what you'll do. Why did he make him swear?
Good, but things can go wrong.
Huh?
Things can go wrong.
Things could go wrong,
Right.
but you're giving your word,
But
so
what
you'll
happens
do
if
it.
You give your word, then you swear, and you can't do it.
Yeah, well, that same question happens if you swear and you can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
Then you're still in that problem. In other words, there's obviously something going on between Yaakov and Yosef and how they understood this request, that Yaakov had reason to believe that this is not going to be a simple thing for Yosef. I need you to promise me. Why would Yaakov be wary that this might not work out? Yeah.
What is the time frame between this time when he's asking him to swear and when he saw him after so many years?
17 years.
17 years he actually was with him in Egypt.
In Egypt,
So he
Yaakov,
would have
yeah.
known what kind of a person he was,
Yes.
and would have known that he is honorable, and would have...
Of course, he loved him more than any of his kids. He never.
well, right, but he may have changed in all those
Well,
years.
one
but
thing we know,
apparently-
right, but we know clearly Yosef was unchanged, and
Yeah.
he was right. This was his whole power, amidst everything that he's been through. So, and Yosef loved his dad like nobody else. So, and you expect if there's any important conversation, it's that on his deathbed, and it's a simple request, and he says no. Another verse, another whole element here. What happened? What gets more interesting is the difference between Yaakov and Yosef, and the fact that Yaakov said, as soon as I die, take me out of here. Bury me in Egypt. Yosef, he says, no, bury me in Canaan. I keep getting texts. I have to get rid of it. It's disrupting the thing. 210 years. So Yosef remained buried. There's a whole story how Moshe Rabbeinu brought Yosef up, etc. And then they carried his bones all throughout the desert for 40 years. Why would Yaakov want to be removed from Egypt and not buried there at all? And Yosef said, bury me here and only take me once you go out. Why that difference? There are two types of people. And then there's Darryl. No.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Carrying the bones, wasn't that a problem since you're not supposed to be near anything?
Cohen didn't carry him.
The Kohanim did it, but other people
The
can.
Levi's carried him.
The Chevra Kadisha.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That was the first Chevra Kadisha.
There are only one Hebra Kadisha or many?
At that time, sure, they rotated. The whole story of the second Pesach Sheni, the fact that they had another month to bring the Passover, why didn't they, those people who brought it the second month, why didn't they bring it with everyone else? They were impure. Why were they impure? Because they were carrying Yosef's bones.
Oh, was that really?
Yeah, that's the reason.
Yeah.
It's all
Been religious for
connected.
40 years and I never knew that. What is this?
Sheesh.
Very
Right, I'm
You want your
ready for
money
the
back,
answer.
right? Yeah, they feel like you should have known that.
I'm ready for the answer now.
So,
Why
well,
would
before we
I-
get to the answer, there's two types of people. There are people. Let's look at two people who are working in a job. Let's say they're working at Boeing. Take that out of the heart, okay? And you have one person who they're loyal, they're dedicated, they're smart, they're doing a good job. But whenever you speak to them and you engage with them, you can see a twinkle in their eye. You can see how their life is not really unfolding here. Their life is really, it's a richer, deeper experience of life. And they see their work like, whatever, I'm here, I'm doing it. But this is not really what it's all about. To understand that character, let's think about the other character. The other character, it's like they live and die with what's going on there. Right? Every project, every success, every failure, it's all tied in. Right? Some people, they take their work very seriously to the point of identification. And to some people, it's like, and what's that other thing? It could be a lot of things. It could be they love traveling, and they live to travel. and they're doing their job, but it's all about traveling to other people. It's their family or whatever it is that's going on, right? And these are two very different experiences. Which one's better? I'm not going to get into the judgment of that. But to understand these two types of people can give us a glimpse of the difference between Yaakov and Yosef. It says Yaakov, he was in Egypt, but he was never really in Egypt. His whole life, he was one of the patriarchs. He spent so many years in Israel. He was raised by Avraham and Yitzchak, and everything about his life was just connection to Hashem. Egypt was a very low place. Egypt was corrupt, etc. But, you came to Yaakov and you said, Yaakov, how come Egypt's not corrupting you? You sit down with with him for 5 minutes. You realize, oh, I see why. Why? He's not really here. He's just, you have some people, they have a big problem on their hands, but they're not in the problem. See, aren't you freaking out right now? No, not really. Well, you should. Technically, you're right. So why aren't you? I don't know, I'm just not living there. I'm living in different places. It's an unbelievable gift. It's an amazing thing for a person to be able to really distance themselves. So the question is, how they react in the place that they do live, and don't try that at home with your family, like, this is not my life, I'm really living elsewhere. That's the whole separate point. But the point is the capacity to be able to be in a certain place, to be in an environment, and not really be there was really embodied by Yaakov Avinu. So I can imagine Yaakov got the paper every morning. He knew what was going on. I don't know if he really got the paper. But the point is, he lived in Egypt. He was familiar with the comings and goings.
You got the papyrus, not the paper.
Yes, exactly. And nonetheless, I saw a store, by the way, a paper store in...
Cairo?
No. It was...
Alexandria?
Berkeley.
Oh.
And it was called Papyrus.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a brilliant name for a paper store. I loved
They're
it.
making
They have cards that are papyrus,
papyrus,
yeah.
and
Oh, yeah?
it's really
Good
nice.
quality stuff.
Is it, but it's paper.
No,
Yeah, but I don't
it's
think
not
they-
paper.
But it feels vintagey and nice. But it's a tough industry to be in at this day and age. But nonetheless, I
Oh,
thought the
this
name
is
was
great.
catchy. But that's what Yaakov was. Yaakov, he lived in Egypt, but in fact, he said his best years were there. So the rabbi said, how could his best years be in Egypt? While he lived in Israel wasn't great. Because he was never there. Yosef was the opposite. Yosef was in Egypt. He wasn't just in Egypt. He was running it and involved, and he was coming and going. He was the viceroy, the chief economist, the minister of agriculture. He ran the whole show.
Right.
And he's been doing it for many, many, many years. And he continued to do it for many years after.
Right. Surprised there's not a pyramid named after him. Why not?
Yes, maybe it was. And the bottom line is, Yosef was the guy that really invested himself in it.
Right.
And the difference was, what's the path? What's the way to deal with conflict? What's the way to deal with a challenge like Egypt? To Yaakov, it was all about, look, I don't belong here. This is not my story.
Right.
So we're here, God put us here, but nonetheless, we're going to sail through and continue connecting to Hashem. And despite the exile, despite the balagan, despite the chaos of life, I'm still going to be out there and going to connect. Yosef is like, the purpose is here. This is where it's at. So therefore, every time Yosef was able to go into Egypt and to find the problem and to elevate it and to serve Hashem within that complicated place, he says that's where we serve Hashem. We don't serve Hashem by kind of disconnecting, having a twinkle in our eye as if we're about to bounce any minute.
Right.
We serve Hashem by going into it, dealing with the troubles, knowing what's going on, going with the ups and downs, emotionally attached. And doing it all right and doing it all connected with Hashem, that's really where it's at. So the question is, which one's right?
They're both right.
I don't think there's a right or a wrong.
Well,
How can you say one's right?
because of the perspective of where you're from. For Joseph being a viceroy of Egypt, he's in a position to do the best for, among other things, his own people. I mean, that's why he essentially let Jacob and his other brothers come there.
Yes.
Now,
Right, but I don't think you can say one is right and one is wrong.
No,
So
that's- I'm
let me
saying you
ask.
can't.
So let me ask a question differently. Why did God create this world? Why did God create a complicated world?
You want me to answer that in like one sentence?
Tikkun olam.
Yes, one sentence.
Because he wanted to.
On one foot.
Yeah, that's
You
technically.
couldn't answer that in two sentences.
Because He wanted us to elevate this world, right? He didn't create angels in a world up in heaven. He wanted us to be here. He wanted us to engage. Why did He make the world in such a way that in order to make a buck, you got to really get into it? Why? Because He wants us to be into it. And He wants us to deal with the world on its terms. And within dealing with the world on its terms is still to find a connection to God through it, not despite it. Yaakov was, despite the balagan, I'm out of here. Yosef's like, look at this balagan, there's God hidden in every single corner. So which one's right? You say they're both right. And the truth is, we need to have both. That's why they're called the Avot. That's why they're called the forefathers, because each of those things teach us. We have to have an ingredient of this and an ingredient of that. Like the famous saying of Pirkei Avot, the beautiful saying, Bal karcha chatachai, the fact that we're alive is not by our choice. The neshama, they don't want to be alive. The neshama would rather stay up in heaven. What's the deal with the balagan, or everything that goes on over here? I've said the story before, how there were two souls that were meeting.
Master of Balagan.
Balagan means chaos. It's one word. It's not Baal Hagan. Baal Hagan means the master of the garden. Balagan means chaos.
What language is it?
It's Hebrew.
Yeah, was your
You have to scream it.
No, in Russian it's the same.
Hebron accent
What
that
is
threw
it?
me off.
Balagan.
Balagan?
Yeah.
They probably got it
They
from.
have a Russian music group called Balagan Unlimited.
Oh, that's great.
Anyway, it was your Brooklyn accent that threw me off on the Hebrew, all right?
Okay. There was two souls that were traveling. One was on its way down, one was on its way up. And the one that's on its way down is this goody two shoes, all excited. Doing on my mission. Can't wait. Little backpack with his name on it. Brand new shoes. Bye, Mom.
Yeah.
Unblemished. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah. What, going up?
You see, and the one that's going up is Sukrachet.
I don't know that word. Don't.
You can tell by the sound of it.
Yeah.
He's
Polite,
beaten
though,
up.
Use foreign language in front of someone who doesn't speak it.
Unless we don't want that person to know what I'm saying. So he's on his way up, and the one that's on his way down, he says, "Hey, what's going on?" And the one that's on his way up doesn't want to talk. It's like, "Don't talk to me." And he says, "So is it true that there's so many mitzvos down there, and you could do so many things?" So the guy says, "Yeah, it's you eat matzah, and you could put on tefillin, and you put a mezuzah on your door, and every time you eat, you make a bracha, and you could kosher, you could keep kosher, and then you keep kosher, you're doing mitzvot." And he's like, "Wow, it's really everything that they told me. Like, you can do amazing things." He says, "So how do you get all this stuff? How do you get kosher food and matzah and mezuzah?" He says, "Well, to get all that stuff, you gotta make money." He says, "Wow, okay, make money. And how exactly do you make money?" He says, "That's where they get you. That's the catch,
Catch 22.
right? To make a buck, it gets complicated, and that's where the world is at. So Hashem created the world, and He wants us to work with the world within it. Yaakov, he's out here. And that's why, as soon as he's dead, he says, "I want to be buried outside. Don't bury me here and take me later." Yosef was embedded there. And therefore, he was buried in Mitzrayim. Yaakov knows that about Yosef.
Yeah.
He knows, to Yosef, the people, they're going to be in Egypt for 210 years under slavery. They're going to deal with all the difficulties of Egypt. We got to be here with them to help them in this process. So he says, "Yaakov, my dear father, you're passing away. Let us bury you here. When the Jewish people leave, we'll take you."
Right.
That would have made sense. And Yaakov, knowing that that's the way Yosef thinks, he says, "I know you're going to have a hard time doing this. It's not just enough that you give me your word. I need you to swear to me." Why? Because every fiber of your being will say, if Yaakov, the holy Yaakov, has passed away in Mitzrayim, let's bury him in Mitzrayim to be here for the Jewish people.
Right.
So the question is, if it's so clear that indeed Yaakov had to be taken out, why? And it would make sense that he should have been buried there. Why indeed did Yaakov insist on be going out? Yosef seems to have a point.
Right. What's the answer?
So there's a piece of Talmud over here I have here on the notes. It says, Amri, they say, Ein chavush matir atzme bibeis hasurim, which means a prisoner cannot free themselves from prison, but depends on others to release them from their shackles, right? The whole concept of a prison is you need somebody outside with a key to get you out. You can't get out. Right? Pretty basic statement, but think about it. Imagine somebody going through trauma. A person who's reliving a very difficult chapter in their life, and they're freaking out. So the best thing is to have somebody who can walk with them, toe to toe, work through with them, support them, know what's bothering them, what's coming up for them at that point, and really be able to work them through and carry them through this very, very difficult experience. That's one method, a very important method. That's having a person on your side.
Right.
You know what also helps a person going through trauma? To have somebody else to remind them of a point in their life that they didn't have the trauma. To have a memory of what life was like when they weren't plagued with all this pain and memories. You need to have both. It's not just enough to have somebody walk with you to help you and understand what you're going through. You need to have somebody who also could remind you of what it's like not to go through this. And that's what really helps a person kind of gather strength and overcome it. And that's the meaning, Ein chavish matir satzmei. On one hand, you need somebody, a person's in prison, they're stuck, they're feeling trauma. So you need somebody with them, but also you need somebody to release them. And the release can happen from the person who's walking with you. Because if you're walking with me, then you're experiencing the problem. You're talking about to me when I remember the trauma. That you can't all of a sudden switch the subject and talk to me about when I don't remember the trauma. So you need to have two different people. And Yaakov was telling Yosef, look, I know that for you, it's a very clear vision on how life works. When the Jewish people are in Egypt, you need to be there with them. And you do. And that's what Yosef did. And Yosef was buried with the Jewish people in Egypt while the Jewish people were there. But Yaakov said, but the Jewish people also need a link, a memory, a connection. They need somebody outside who's in Canaan, who's in the land of Israel, where they have where to go to. It's not just enough to support them while they're in Egypt, but they need to have a place to go to in order to get out of Egypt.
That's the whole point.
That's the point. So that's what Yaakov said, Unisasani mi Mitzrayim. He didn't just say, Hoitziani mi Mitzrayim, take me out of Egypt. He says, raise me up from Egypt. What's the term, Unisasani, raise me up? In other words, I need something beyond this balagan, beyond this chaos.
Yep, I get it.
Did any of the other Jews request to be brought out after they were, brought out of Egypt into Canaan? Oh, of course, unless
I don't know. It's not recorded. I mean, you had Jews that died there, and it's not recorded. I don't know. Maybe families took their loved ones out. I don't know. It's a good question.
That's the point, though.
That's the point. So,
who was the first person in the universe to say that the Jews shall have the promised land in Canaan? When was that first promised to us?
It wasn't by a person, though. It was by God.
To who?
Abraham.
That's right.
Yes.
So Abraham started living by knowing that Canaan was the destiny of our people.
Yes.
So
Canaan.
Canaan.
Yeah.
So Jacob, I would say the same thing. I'm a Jew. Take me to Canaan. I want the Jewish people to know that's your home. You want to be, every person who fills out a will or knows he's going to die Usually, hey, bury me next to my mother and father, or bury me where I grew up and I loved, or bury me in the promised land. That's how I
You know,
feel.
Yes.
it's easier said than done.
Well, maybe, but still, that's how I feel about
Well, I
it.
feel about it too, but
And if somebody could do it, right?
well, yeah.
Yes, there are people who do it.
Right.
So here's the point. We need to each embody both of them. We need to have a Yaakov and we need to have a Yosef. In other words, it's not okay that when life gets complicated, we talk about remaining grounded, right? It's not okay that when life gets complicated, we're like, I'm out. You know, there's a Hasidic saying that says that there are two statements in the Talmud. One of them is Bishvili Nivra Elam. I don't think it's in the Talmud, it might be in the Mishnah. That the world was created for me.
For me?
Yeah,
Okay.
the world was created for me. And another statement is Aniva Afsi. No, it's not Aniva Afsi. Ani Ayin Va'efes. Like, I'm nothing. Humility. Okay, so there's two, it's not in the Talmud, but two general Jewish principles. One is the world was created for me, another one is I'm nothing. So he says that, you know, it's, of course, you have to know when to pull which card. So the Hasidic saying is that some people think they're clever. Whenever there's a moment of responsibility, they say, I'm nothing. Whenever life offers things, all of a sudden, yeah, the world was created for me. This is it.
Yeah.
But the truth is, the premise behind it is the other way around. That when there's responsibility, you say, who should do it? The world was created for you. This is all about you. You need to step up. And then when there's a time to be humble, we say, it's not about you. So which one is it, right?
Yeah, but those are two different nothings.
Huh?
That's two
Right.
different
That's
concepts of
exactly
nothing.
true. That's exactly true. And here's the same point over here that we're talking about. Person will say, when life gets chaotic and everything else, say, look, Jew, we're supposed to be out of, like Jacob, we're supposed to be out of Egypt. Don't get me mixed up with all the complications, right?
Yeah, that's bad.
And then when it's time to be distant, and then also we get very, very involved. So it's the same. The message over here is that, and the Rebbe kind of brings this point down, and then he speaks primarily about Jacob, and we'll talk about that. But first of all, it's important to realize we need to embody both. Now, how do you embody both? If you're getting really invested, if you're getting really involved, then how do you stay aloof? Like we said, you're either the person that's with me in the trauma, or you're the person reminding me what goes on beyond the trauma, but you can't do both. The answer is, what's the foundation? If the reason why we're getting invested in the world, because we think that the world is a very interesting, attractive place to get involved in, and we like the thrill of business and everything else, and this is what speaks to us. So then when it comes time to pray, you're like, what's this going to help me? It doesn't. One doesn't work with the other. Look, making a buck, I get. Taking a nice vacation, I understand. What's the point of prayer? How does that fit in? Well, there's another side. There's a spiritual side. You may want to nourish that. Okay, fine. So it's minimal. It kind of works, but not really aligned.
It could be.
The other way of looking at it is, what's the foundation? What's the purpose? Why am I looking to make a buck? Why am I looking to take a nice vacation? Because it'll enrich my life. And what's the purpose of my life? To connect to Hashem. So then, while the person is invested all in their business, they can simultaneously understand clearly, this is not who I am. They can be a Joseph, and they can be a Jacob. They can be a Yosef and a Yaakov at the same time.
Right.
And the Rebbe says, the lesson is, I want to say it in Yiddish, to bring the flavor. The Rebbe says, how good it should be for a Jew in exile. And it can be great. Right. Wie gut es soll sein der Matzah von the Yidden and Golos, no matter how good it should be for a Jew in exile. Sai begashmi is physically and sai beruchni is spiritually. As there are two veretz Mitzrayim chil v'aretz, he's living in the most expensive area in Egypt. Prime real estate, in a mansion.
Right.
And they have a minion in their house.
Right.
Wow.
And it's all unbelievable. Dafür aber ständig wissen und gedenken, nonetheless the person needs to always remember and know that the demand is, like Jacob said, Unusasani mi Mitzrayim, raise me out of here. This is not my place.
Right.
And yet I'm fully here. And that's the power how a Jew can be there simultaneously. because they're not really a contradiction. But in the way it played out with Yaakov and Yosef, Yaakov embodied that spirit more, and Yosef embodied that spirit more.
Yeah. In order to teach us a lesson.
In order to teach us a lesson. So this answers our original question. You're going to read the parsha next week and see. Yaakov tells Yosef, I want you to bury me outside of Egypt. I want you to take me to Israel. He says, what? I'll do it. He says, no, I want you to promise me. He says, okay, I'll promise. He says, why promise? Because to Yosef, what we said earlier, what's the concept of a promise? The concept of a promise is when it's beyond rational. When I need to go out of myself. Because to Yosef, to bury Yaakov in Israel was him to go out of against his nature. But ultimately, that's what was destined to be. So a person needs to create a memory. Memories are very powerful because memories forge our identity. A person who doesn't have a good has a very, very sketchy memory about their past. It's not just that they're missing out on memories. They don't have a complete sense of self, of who they are, right? And it always struck me how, sometimes people have odd names. Names that are, you could see how this person as a kid was harassed because of that name. Last name.
Like what kind of name?
Huh?
Obesity.
What is that?
Obesity?
ABCDE.
Oh.
Oh,
did
yeah,
you?
I said.
Isn't that ridiculous?
What is that?
Yes. Who
That's a
was
girl's name.
Yeah.
Really?
Some
She
people,
was,
yeah.
the
Yeah,
girl was
she-
ridiculed
the
here in
pregnant
Orange County
ABC.
Yeah, but it
Airport.
sounds like
It's
obesity.
And they called it
ABCDE.
That's
But
what they
it's
call her
pronounced-
first
Yeah.
name?
Pronounced
ABCD.
obesity.
ABCD.
Yeah, and they made fun of her when she
Was
got
she
on the
fat?
airplane.
That was on.
And the
That was on the
agent made
internet,
fun of
It's
yeah.
not
her.
obesity.
Really?
It's
Sounds like it.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Look,
Wow.
Look,
But I'm talking about last names specifically.
Oh.
Put the hand down like
forget the
that.
names. I got something to say.
But you'll wait till I finish.
You're finished.
Finish when I say I'm finished.
Hey,
Ferrets,
listen up.
ferrets.
Before
Let
I
me
lose-
finish, Daryl. Okay, go. You're making me look mean over here. Go already.
The difference when you swear to your father, yes, I will bury you in Canaan,
Good
you
one.
have to have the higher level of human feelings of empathy and compassion and love, in this case, for your father, in order to truly say, I am committed to do this.
Yes.
If you're not of higher integrity,
Good word.
then you're not going to keep your promise. As a matter of fact, to me, the main definition of a promise is integrity.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep your promise, you have integrity. You don't keep your promise, you don't have integrity.
All right.
If you don't have integrity, you're not a complete human being. So, the connection to God, the reason why there is God, is to bring out the higher levels of compassion and empathy and all the things that make us human and different than animals, and to have this relationship with other people the way other living things cannot have those kinds of relationships. Like I can't with my house cat. I wish I could, but I can with you.
Yes.
So it's a demonstration of love and compassion, where
And integrity.
Joseph, and integrity, that Joseph demonstrated. I did the same thing with my father when he was dying.
Okay, Daryl, I want to finish my thought, and then we'll go on. Okay, that's all right. So, I'm talking about embarrassing last names, and people don't change them so easily,
Yes.
right? And it's thinking because
I wonder why
you say
they
it's a last name. A lot of people on the outside would say, like, if I had that last name, I'd change it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right?
Look at me,
Okay, what's your last name?
Satin, but I keep being called Satan all the
Right.
time.
And I think because it's so tied up with identity.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's who I am. So for anyone on the outside, we don't have that sense. It's like, whatever, I'll call you this, I'll call you that. It makes no difference. It's you. But for that person, their name is who they are in a very deep way. It's because they come from the family. And that's my same point about memory, right? When you have a memory, it forges that sense of identity. So we need to create. How do you stay grounded amidst the chaos of daily life? Is when there's a memory of a sense of self that's not this. The more, once we create this understanding or this vision of ourselves where we're not that thing, so no matter how chaotic life is, sometimes I've been doing this for you're running a business and the business has consumed you for 15 years. That's all you know yourself to be, so then it's impossible to be grounded in that situation. If a person creates a vision of themselves so they can identify, like, this is who I am, then that memory, it's like that person who's reminding the trauma victim, like, hey, this is not, you're feeling this now, but it's not who you are.
Right.
And it's the same thing also what we can do. When we go to shul to daven, we're not just asking Hashem for things. We're recreating a sense of ourselves.
That's right.
That's different than whatever it is we're going to be doing for the rest of the day.
That's right.
So we put on tefillin, we're doing a mitzvah, and we're saying like, and this is where we're at. So then, when everything else goes crazy, we can still like fall back and be like,
That's right.
but there's this.
That's right. Very good.
L'chaim.